Hey, this is John Mark, the pastor at Cottonwood Creek. Welcome back to a podcast where we deal with some of the toughest issues and just some of the things that we really need to craft a solid argument to respond to those who have questions about the faith. And today we're blessed with Trip Allman. And so, Trip, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do. I love your history as a pastor, but Dad, all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. I won't take however old I am I won't take that long to do it. 43. I'm turning this year, I think, if I did the math right. But so I grew up in a Christian home. Was in church every Sunday, every Wednesday. But when I became, junior, senior in high school, I started asking myself the first question at least was, why am I a Christian? I was convinced I was a Christian because I was born into it. I didn't know any better. I was just a Christian.
Didn't know any better.
At this point, I meet so many students who are in the same boat as I was. Why am I even a Christian? I started realizing that I'm a Christian because I was born into it. But wait a minute, what about all those other people around the world who were born into some other religion, some other worldview? I'm pretty sure that if I was born into that situation, I would be a different religion. But wait a minute, that means I get to go to heaven because I was born into it. And other people are going to, on the Christian view, are going to go to hell because they were born into it. Something doesn't seem right about all of this. Well, that initial question opened up Pandora's box of questions for me. And I think I was just at this time where I was beginning to pay attention. To what was being said and what was really happening in the world. So I began to see some inconsistencies with what was going on in the life of Christians at my church and the way that they were living. So a lot of hypocrisy. We said we were about loving everyone, even our enemies, yet in my particular situation, if someone walked in that looked different than us, white middle-class Americans, then there was whispering going on. What are those people doing here?
Right.
I started paying attention to the evil that was going on in the world. Wait, I thought we were supposed to have this God that was loving and all good, yet how is this happening?
Right.
Why did my friend Brian Deason pass away from cancer while I was a junior in high school?
Right.
Why is it that I'm learning one thing in biology class in high school and learning something very different at Sunday school class on Sundays, these things that just didn't go together? So I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I started asking questions.
Right.
So I went to, my family, my pastor, youth leader, my Sunday school teachers, and unfortunately, I didn't get any answers. Now, I was told that I needed to have more faith.
Right.
So I tried. I didn't know what that meant. I'm still not real sure what that means, but I think it's like, you grit your teeth and you close your eyes and just don't let it escape.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I tried that. Now, as I left my Christian bubble and went to university, very different environment, where I thought, okay, well, now I'm free to explore truth for what it really is. I was no longer confined to think, act, dress, talk, believe a certain way. Well, by God's grace, I stumbled across a realm of study called apologetics, Christian apologetics.
Yeah.
That was the first time that I realized that Christians thought, and in fact thought very well.
Right.
I think the first article I remember reading was by Dr. William Lane Craig, who is a philosopher apologist. It blew my mind. I became convinced as a freshman and sophomore in college that Christianity is actually true. I had never even thought about it in those terms before. It was just something to be believed. But Christianity is actually true, and if it's true, then it can withstand the toughest questions.
The hardest questions.
The hardest questions that we can possibly think of if it's true. Now, does that mean it's satisfying for every question that we had? Well, maybe not. But we don't have to be scared of those questions. It was at that time in college And I was also at that time, I think, struggling with bitterness for the church that I grew up in. I committed the rest of my life. I want to create environments where students can ask their questions freely and pursue truth. And of course, I was convinced that if they're doing that, it will lead to, in fact, the person of truth. His name is Jesus.
That's right.
I was a competitive gymnast, high school and college. I began coaching as well. And at that time, coaching was just my pastoral outlet. Like this is where God had me to create those kinds of environments. And I coach gymnastics. It's a very relational kind of sport, especially coach to gymnast. When I was spending, over 20 hours a week with teenagers, you just have the kind of environment where you can ask questions and they're asking questions and you're doing life together. So that I was a full-time coach for just over 20 years. Met my wife through the sport of gymnastics as I was coaching, and just having that in common was, the life of a gymnast and the hours spent in the gym. Like that's kind of unique. You need someone else that understands that to be able to be compatible, right. I think. Anyway, long story short, we both were so interested in the same sorts of things and thinking Christianly. We got involved in a church in my hometown. So from college, we moved back to my hometown where I had grown up. The plan was to take over the gym that I grew up in.
Sure.
We got involved in a local church because we were kind of disheartened with the state of churches in my little Bible Belt southern town, where it was almost like churches were either fairly doctrinally sound but kind of stuck in their old traditional ways, so they were a holy huddle.
Right.
Not letting anybody else in, or the new contemporary churches were, out there in the community, but if you went to one of their church gatherings on a Sunday, if they opened the Bible, they shouldn't have, because they were taking things so far out of context. So we got involved with a church. Around the time I started thinking, I guess we're going to have to plant a church because my heart is breaking for my hometown.
Right.
We found a church plant that was just doing a stellar job. We got involved. Somehow or another, God began to shift me from the gym, that being my pastoral outlet, to the local church being my pastoral outlet, such that I was asked to come on staff to help start community groups, go through an eldership program. Ended up then full-time as a pastor for 10 years before coming on board with Summit Ministries.
Summit Ministries.
Yeah, which is where I am now. I've been with Summit for 4 years.
And the whole point of Summit Ministries is to take that student who is struggling with some of the questions that you have, that we all that I had as well, growing up in a Christian home, in church, and then all of a sudden you go to college, you begin to ask questions, and you go, do I have answers? And that's the beauty of Christianity. If it's true, then it can stand up to any question. And I love the way you couched that a few minutes ago, where you said, we have answers. They may not always satisfy you perfectly in this world, in this realm,
right,
but we have answers. One of the things that I've found, and love to hear your response on this, is the question of the problem of evil. Yeah. Anytime we have a Q&A here at Cottonwood Creek, and we're in the middle of the reality conference where we're trying to bring clarity out of chaos, and we need this more than anything. One of the biggest questions that people ask, and it's kind of related to the existence of God, is, if we have an all-powerful and all-good God, how come he allows evil? Yeah. Kind of navigate for us how we should and could respond in a situation where someone may be at school or some student asks us that question. What's your thought as it related to, if we've got an all-powerful and an all-good God, how come he allows evil?
Yes. Okay, absolutely. This is, I think, one of the toughest questions that there is when it comes to my own faith. This is really, I think, the question that led me to doubt the most. And when I run into students, and just like in your experience as a pastor, this one is powerful. I think, first of all, our approach to anyone asking this question needs to be one of humility to start with.
Right.
Oftentimes, people who are asking this question are not necessarily asking this on an intellectual level. They might be. But more often than not, what they're asking is not exactly why would God allow evil. Often what they're asking is, why did God allow this thing to happen in my life or the life of someone that I love? When we do Christian apologetics, and this is, I think, a danger, and I've seen apologists do this time and time again, and I cringe. We like to jump right into the ideas and right into the arguments, and we forget that though apologetics does take ideas up into the abstract, we talk about these questions, we use philosophy, we use critical thinking to address topics like this. We forget that the ideas are tethered to real people and real life situations.
That's right.
We cannot do that. We must remember that to begin with before we even start a conversation. So the very first thing I would suggest to anyone when you have someone to come and ask you, challenge you about the problem of evil, I would suggest the first thing that you do is ask that person in front of you, tell me, why is this question important to you? Why are you asking me this question? I think we have to know that answer before we know where to go with this answer. Sometimes, in my line of work at Summit Ministries, where students are coming to us because they have these questions, oftentimes it is in the intellectual realm. And so we can go there, but so often it's not. It's the emotional realm.
That's right.
And so let me go in both those directions potentially right now. On the intellectual side of things, and this probably ties into the emotional side as well, the first thing we have to remember is that the problem of evil, everyone actually has to deal with it. It's not just a problem for the Christian, but it's a problem for everyone who's complaining about the evil that we witness in the world. And so we get to ask, okay, so what worldview handles this the best? And if we think about it, only a theistic worldview has the capability to address this question. An atheist or naturalistic worldview, for example, what is evil on that worldview? So again, I would suggest that if you have determined someone especially is coming to you asking this question on an intellectual level, you should certainly start by asking them, well, what do you mean by evil? Do you mean evil as something real, something objective, a real problem, or is it just something that you don't like? You see, in order to complain about the problem of evil, the person making the challenge must assume that there is actual evil. Well, that implies there must be a standard of what is good, what is right, the way that things are supposed to be.
Right.
Evil, the way that St. Augustine puts it, he says, evil is a privation of the right order of things. Well, of course, this assumes that there is a right order of things. This is assuming there must be a God, a creator, that designed the world in a particular way. So the only point I'm really making right now is, in order to talk about this, the Christian worldview can talk about it, but a naturalistic worldview can't talk about it.
Can't.
So that's an interesting way to get the conversation started anyway. Then we can deal, though, with this intellectual argument. Okay, it typically goes something like you said, okay, first of all, an all-powerful being can do anything. Second, an all-good being would want to prevent evil. Therefore, because evil exists, either this God that we worship is not all-powerful, or he's not all good, or he just doesn't exist. And so any of these would say that the Christian God, the way we describe him, all good and all-powerful, that God doesn't exist. So I think the way to go about this is just to walk through those premises to say, is this accurate? And this is what I do with students all the time, and I love bringing them into the discussion because I say, do we have any problems with these first two premises? Can an all-powerful being do anything? Can God do anything? No, actually, God can't do anything. And that sounds almost heretical even to say, doesn't it? If we're talking about an all-powerful being, that being can do anything that power can do.
Right.
Some ways to come at this, and you've probably heard it this way, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it?
Yeah.
And what we're doing, we're getting at this, conundrum. What we're asking is, can God go against his own nature, kind of thing? Can God make a class so boring that even he falls asleep in it? Can God be not God? Really, is what we're asking when we say something like, can God do something illogical? Can God go against his own nature? All right, so an all-powerful being can do anything that power can do anything that is logically possible. God cannot sin, for example. God cannot lie. God cannot be not God. So those are some things that God cannot do. All right. That second premise, an all-good being would want to prevent evil. Would he? If we can think of any possible alternative or any possible counter-example, we've shown that premise 2 is not actually the case. One that I use often is tackling an old lady bad. Oh, sure, that's evil. If I just tackled an old lady, and I'm a very image-driven sort of person, so I see a football player and this old woman crossing the street, just minding my own business, and wham! Obviously, that's bad. Oh, but wait, if we were to back up, what if the lady was tackled out of the path of an oncoming bus? Well, that's a change in perspective. All we did is just come up with a counter-example to an all-good being would want to prevent evil. We should probably tag a line to the end of that, unless there's a sufficient reason to allow it. Now, so what I've done right now, I just walked through the premises. Now I've changed those two premises. An all-powerful being can do anything that's logically possible. Number 2, an all-good being would want to prevent evil unless there's a sufficient reason to allow it. 3, evil exists, so now what are our conclusions? Well, evil is either a logical impossibility to prevent, or there's a good reason to allow it, if this God does exist. Intellectual problem? Solved. There we go. And then you're still left with, wait. Okay, so if we're only talking about this on the intellectual level, we're done. And this is an attempt, I think, to show that normally the intellectual issue is not the question that's being asked.
Right.
I think it's important for us to understand this intellectual argument because it prepares us for the evil and suffering that we will face. I can actually answer the other question that people are asking: why did God allow this thing to happen?
Right. Here's
the answer, and here should be your answer too. I don't know. I don't know. As much as we can wrestle with the intellectual problem, right? To say, okay, here's a possibility why God would allow this. Don't go there. Look.
Yeah.
When you're challenged, ask the question, why are you asking me this? And when they share a story that is heartbreaking because of something they've suffered, then it is our chance as Christians to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
That's right.
To sit with that person, to cry with that person, to listen and listen and listen and say, I don't know, and comfort them with the love that you've received from the Lord Christ, and sit there in his presence and in the presence of this person that you're talking to.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder for us, especially when someone gives you a heartbreaking example. The best thing you can do is be heartbroken, yes. Right? Yes. And realize we don't know. There are things that I see happen. I've been a pastor for 26 and a half years, and I've seen some things and had parents or children ask me, why did God allow this to happen? And the best answer I can give sometimes is, I don't know. I don't know the mind and the heart and the will of God. I know what Isaiah said, his thoughts are high, as high above. My thoughts are the stars in the heaven above, the earth. And the reality of it, it is okay for us to say, I don't know. And I love the way you couch your argument, because sometimes when people ask us, why does God allow evil and suffering? Sometimes I heard someone else say it, sometimes they need a philosopher, sometimes they need a pastor, right? I love that idea that you want to follow up. Why are you asking this question? Did you lose a child? Did you lose a parent? Did something tragic happen in your life? And if that's the case, it is a pastoral response. It is a loving response. It's not just an intellectual response. But you also have to realize that God does allow evil in this world, so why might He be allowing evil in this world?
Yeah. Great question. So I think this is where we have to go to the Christian story of reality. We have to go all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to creation to see this very good God, this perfect, holy, righteous, just, perfect God decided for some crazy reason to create this universe. The Christian story says the pinnacle of His creation was us, mankind, which is wild. This is crazy kind of stuff, that He would create us in His image to be in a relationship with Him who already existed in a relationship. He didn't need to create us for any sort of reason, but He chose to. Now, part of the goodness of His creation and in His creation of us was to give us moral freedom, which means the true ability to choose Him or to choose against Him. And when we go back to Genesis and we see the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and not good, a negation of that thing. This freedom was exercised by our forefathers in that negative sort of way, and we freely follow in their footsteps. Well, a holy, just, and righteous God should get rid of those creatures who have now done evil. If God is the standard of what is good, any departure from Him, from His character, from the way that He created reality, is going to be, was the introduction of evil, or now we continue in that. We perpetuate it. That's the word that I was looking for. And so God ought to get rid of evil, but the problem is, can you really separate evil from evildoers? Well, maybe, but not without a whole story to unfold, I guess. That's the whole process, really, of the Bible. What we have is God pursuing us, seeking to bring us back into a right relationship with Him, but He has to get rid of everything that is a barrier between us and Him. As we exercise our moral freedom to go against Him, how does He combat that to bring us back to Himself? And so you have the story of the Bible, and it comes in the form of Jesus, right? Who lived the perfect life, never committing any evil, and then making a great exchange. All of His goodness for our badness, so that we can be restored to that original right relationship. Yeah. God allows, now this is not saying why God allows particular events of evil, but God has allowed this evil to exist in some sort of way, but it will not exist forever.
That's right.
He will be getting rid of it, and He is in the process of doing that. Why hasn't He gotten rid of it yet? Well, apparently, as Scripture says, because He's patient.
Long-suffering and patient.
He's patient.
Not willing that any should perish. And that's part of the gospel call for us to share, right?
This is exactly right. And I am so glad that the Lord was patient for me.
Yeah.
To come to a saving knowledge in Him. Is it worth, and this is a question I think we have to ask ourselves, is it worth what we're going through now, the evil and suffering that exists? Are we willing to endure that suffering so that others may meet Jesus? apparently he thinks what's going on is worth it. Now, I can't begin to wrap my mind around specific instances, so why would he allow this or why would he allow that? Right. But the Christian story at least gives some sort of answer to this, and it does so in a way that no other worldview can do. It makes sense of the fact that human beings are valuable.
Yeah.
It makes sense of this problem of evil that we have, and it tells us the end.
That's right.
That it will be removed, that every tear will be wiped away, and everything will be restored back to the way God originally intended it. Right. So that's how I would go at it anyway.
That's a good word, because at the end of the day, here's what we understand. Evil is a result of God being so loving that he wanted to create free beings.
Yes.
That we chose to sin. You go back to Adam and Eve right there. He did not create the sin, but he created the ability, because he ultimately created free beings to choose.
Correct.
He didn't want to create robots, old argument. He wanted to create free beings to freely choose to worship him or reject him. As a result of the rejection, evil came into the world. It still exists, but the beauty of Christianity, as it relates to all other religions, including atheism, which is in fact a religion, that Christianity is the only one that tells the story and has a legitimate explanation as to why is evil here and is it ever going to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the gospel. And so final thoughts on the problem of evil for a student out there.
Yeah, I think final thoughts is just to remember that when this challenge comes at you, first off, you need to ask the question back, why are you asking me this question? Understand the heart of the person that's in front of you. So quickly, us in apologetics want to jump to the idea level, and we forget about the person that's sitting in front of us. And so go there first. For those of you who are struggling, you're asking this question. Maybe it's something to ask yourself. Why am I asking this question? Am I asking this because I see some potential discrepancy or some sort of inconsistency within the Christian worldview? So okay, that's an intellectual sort of thing. I bet that most of you are not asking the question because of that, but it's because of something that has happened within your own life. Take stock of that. Let me encourage you with the gospel. Look, Jesus loves you. Whatever you have done, whatever sins that you've committed, the Lord is ready to accept you into part of his family. He knew all of those things, and he looks at you and says, no, you are mine. You are clean. This gospel has, it's very interesting. On one hand, the gospel says, you are so nasty, dirty, filthy, rotten. It took nothing less than the Son of God coming to die for you. That'll humble you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it says, no, I knew you were going to do all of those things, and I freely lay down my life because I love you so much. You are mine. Man, that gives you some confidence. So let me remind you of that. No matter what kind of evil you have contributed to, but also the other way around, whatever evil has been done to you, the only possible true healing that you could ever have is through the person and work of Jesus on the cross that suffered on your behalf. He understands. He's been through it. The wrath of God, in fact, was poured out upon him so that you would not have to experience that, but so that you could receive real, true, forever healing and being brought back into his family forever.
Amen. Well, Tripp, thanks for being here, and hopefully that helps you wrap your mind around a little bit the question of evil and the problem of evil as you deal with it. If someone asks you if there is a good God, why, and he is all-powerful, why would he allow evil? Before you begin to intellectually answer the question, ask them the personal question. Why is this personal to you? And see how you need to answer. And because in certain situations, the best answer is to be brokenhearted. That's what Jesus did when he he heard Lazarus had died, he wept. And so sometimes weep with them, then encourage them, then ultimately take them to the truth and reality of Scripture, which is, man, God created us as free beings to freely worship Him or reject Him. Part of rejection meant sin entered into the world, suffering, evil, hardship, but the beauty of the gospel is that God has already taken care of that on the cross. Amazing. The worst trade in the history of the universe is we were able to give our sin to Jesus on the cross, and He gave us His righteousness. That's the worst trade in the history of the universe. And then ultimately, there's coming a day when God's going to take it all away. All the evil will be gone. No more death, no more dying, no more pain, no more crying. That's how God is ultimately going to deal with the problem of evil. Tripp, thanks again. God bless.
Thank you.
Have a great day.